Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Forward podcast. I am excited to welcome to you a previous Thrive Forward guest, and that is my dear friend, Karla Hult. Karla, by day and sometimes by night and weekend, is a news anchor and reporter for Care 11 News, the NBC affiliate here in the Twin Cities. How Karla and I met? Not through her TV gig. It is actually through our shared journey of being Alzheimer's daughters. Karla and I met at the Alzheimer's Walk a few years ago and then ended up miraculously being in the same room. Fate brings us together on a repeated basis through our journey, and our hearts have connected, and Karla has been a huge support of mine through my journey. And just recently, she has launched her own company called So Many Goodbyes that, as I have told you many time and time again, Forethought is kind of spearheaded after my dad. So Many Goodbyes is spearheaded off of Karla's journey with her father as well. She's going to share with us some of those conversations that she has through her new company and the services that they offer with caregivers, training them and talking to them about the importance of understanding and bringing together the emotions of family versus the critical job that they play in the lives of so many families battling Alzheimer's and dementia. Then we're going to talk about some numbers and statistics, because what would this be if we didn't bring in some of those? And then she has some really tactical 3 tips for you to share with any caregiver you know in your life, or if you yourself are a caregiver. Karla will share with you some of those things that keep us apart from what we really need to be doing. So those 3 things, very easy tactical things that you can do today to benefit yourself going forward and allowing yourself to be the adequate caregiver that you want to be without losing yourself throughout this long journey. So tune in. And as always, please share the episode if you find it of value. Karla, thank you for joining us back. You are the first guest on the Thrive Forward podcast to be on twice.
So honored, humbled and honored. Always excited to talk with you, my dear friend.
Well, I'm glad you are joining us for a month featuring a topic that is very near and dear to both of our hearts, which is the journey with Alzheimer's and caregiving and all of those things as we celebrate the Alzheimer's Walk here in the Twin Cities and Alzheimer's awareness, all of those things this month. It's great to shed light on things. So we've been talking about the sandwich generation, which both of us can attest to and experience through our journey. And we've talked about the rising cost of care. We're going to talk about conversations and caregiving, which I know you're going to talk a little bit about today. But for those who don't know you and haven't listened to your previous episode, maybe you can just give us a synopsis of your journey and kind of how you decided to launch your new company, So Many Goodbyes.
Well, thank you so much. So yes, I am an Alzheimer's daughter like you, Shannon, and like so many other people throughout this country. You might have a partner, a friend, a neighbor, a parent who has this disease, which is so difficult and goes on forever. So I'm also a Care 11 reporter. And for many years, I was documenting my dad's journey with Alzheimer's and did that on social media initially, and then eventually also shared it on Care 11 last year, both in a standalone story or 2, and then in an Alzheimer's special. I've also been so grateful, so blessed to be an MC for the Alzheimer's Association for their mini walks and for a lot of activities that they do. I try to advocate for them anytime I can, because I'm all about supporting and lifting up those on this journey today. Because for me, it was a defining moment in my life. It was the most challenging chapter of my life in many regards. And that's despite the fact that it literally went for those 9.5 years from the initial realization that my dad was struggling to saying our final goodbye to him. And it was so hard, especially because I became a mother during that time. I was trying to raise those babies during that time. I was trying to be present at work, present for my parents and present for my children. So it's just that challenge again that 6.2 million Americans plus their families are going through. And so given all of that, given what I experienced, given what I know so many others experience day in and day out, and also knowing how much caregivers themselves are challenged, both within individual homes and then at long-term care centers, I said to myself, I have to do something more. I felt really called. And that is truly because I felt so changed by both my dad's journey and then ultimately by saying goodbye to him for that last time. And for me, it was such a crushing and profound moment. And it truly called me to question my own identity and to say, honestly, who am I without my dad? Who am I without his moral compass and without his guiding hand? And part of his legacy is not only the character that he maybe planted in me a little bit, but also the fact that he always tried to make a difference in our greater community, helping refugees when they first arrived in our country, really just contributing in any way he could with senior citizens even, which of course he became a part of that club. So this is honoring that legacy too, and his community service. And when I say this, I mean so many goodbyes, because I launched it on Father's Day, and it is a company truly in his honor and hoping to give back to other families and also caregivers and the industry. It's not just one group, because we know full well this is a societal issue. It's a global issue. And this is something we all need to be in on together.
Yeah, I shared in my last podcast that I recorded. I actually don't know. My team will put it together in whatever order it is. So if you're listening to just this one, $388 billion is what the Alzheimer's disease costs America as a whole every year. And a lot of times, you and I will talk about this because of our journeys, but I ran into a woman whose father had just been diagnosed in Chicago and she had no idea. She didn't know anything. She was like, so my dad's going to die from this. And she was doing my nails, and to be able to have that conversation with her and say like, yes, and cherish the moments that you have with him. And this is your opportunity to be able to become more active in what is a really amazing community of individuals who are there to support you, to make sure that you don't feel alone in the process, right? Because it can feel that way.
And I think just a couple follow-ups to what you just said, that is my mission statement, to let everyone know you are not alone. You're not alone when you are going through this disease yourself. You're not alone if you're a loved one supporting your loved one. You're not alone if you're a caregiver. But also related to that financial statistic, they say by 2050, it will be $1.1 trillion. So if we think it's a disaster today, it is just a crisis awaiting us. And in our healthcare system, our personal finances, our community, our country can't afford that. And I think that that's really scary too. So even if you don't think you have a dog in the fight, this is something I say often, you may not think you have a connection to the disease, which I would argue you probably do. You probably have a neighbor or friend who might be struggling with this in some way. But even if you think that as a taxpayer and as someone who needs our healthcare system to be intact, you care about this disease because it's so expensive emotionally and financially.
Yeah, it's the disease that everyone comes to me from a financial planning perspective and say, how do I make sure that if this happens to me, my loved ones aren't impacted? And I tell people a lot, like, that this is the biggest impact you can have in your financial life. Market fluctuations here and there, even what we experienced last spring with, the market crashing, or in 2008, it doesn't have as much of an impact as something as long as a 9-year journey with a cost of care that isn't going to always be the same. I talk about how, it starts out gradually and gets more complex, because what people don't realize is there are physical aspects that come with it. It's not just the mental aspects of things. There's psychological, and it changes, and it's different for each human being. You and I have compared our dad's journeys, and some of their journeys are alike and some of them are very different. my dad has a lot of physical limitations that have happened for him, and you guys didn't experience that as much, at least at the similar stages that we were in. Mm-hmm. How do you, go ahead. You were going to say something.
I think at some point, I think the disease does end up debilitating folks, even to that physical place, because it robs us so much cognitively initially, but it eventually also robs people of just basic biological processes. And I think when my dad, a really talented athlete, could no longer walk, that was, just a real epiphany of this disease takes everything. And that part, I think, is fairly universally felt in terms of it's just that tragedy of, robbing first the mind and eventually going after the body as well.
Yeah, it isn't. Like if you can paint a picture for people of that journey, it's not a painting people want to hang in their living room, right?
No.
There's a lot of pain that goes with that. And I've talked many times about how hard it has been each step of the way with my dad, when he is the person I used, just like for you, you and your dad have that special relationship. I do too. And I can't call him the same way I can and have the same conversations that I was able to do. But now, most recently, we were like, oh, he can't tie his shoes anymore. He can't use a zipper. He can't tie, his pants. And so we've had to make some of these transitions, even turning on the shower, or things that we take for granted as fully able-bodied individuals. Like, what is that experience now for somebody who has been able to do it before, and how that can be really hard when you have to start asking people for help. And I think that that's something that you are leading into with some of your workshops that you're doing with So Many Goodbyes. Can you share a little bit about what are some of those conversations that you're starting to have in that caregiving space with those transitions that happen throughout the caregiving experience?
Yeah, well, everything you just described, I would define as a goodbye. You're saying goodbye to that dad who could put on his shoes by himself. And you're saying goodbye constantly to those individual abilities and individual recognitions. And so I actually have the 3 services, and one of them is those workshops. And with the workshops, I'm going into the long-term care centers, and I'm presenting to these frontline workers who are doing this incredibly important, noble, I would argue, noble work day in and day out of caring for our loved ones in this very vulnerable state. And they're doing it sometimes at a moment for families that is so tense and frankly traumatic. Because if you are calling upon caregivers to come into your home, or if you're moving your loved one into a long-term care center, you've made that difficult decision to basically hand over the reins to someone else to care for them and to provide the most sensitive and private of services. And so it can be a little bit difficult, especially for families who may not have flexibility in their schedule, given what kind of work they have, or maybe don't have that close connection to their loved one, but still want to protect them. They may be more apt, if you will, to communicate in a way that's a little bit more critical or tense. So trying to encourage caregivers to just recognize that families are coming from that painful place, and that ultimately what families are wanting is for caregivers anywhere, whether they're in their own homes or at the long-term care center, to see the person beyond the disease. And that's something I just really am so adamant about, because these are people who live full lives, contributed to their communities, did incredible work on behalf of their families or their friends or their community, and really deserve that dignity and deserve that respect in this stage. And so I think that kind of reassurance to families is critical. And so just really providing and underscoring that, because in the chaos of this disease, in trying to manage everything, whether you are a bookended parent or whether you are the caregiver trying to manage your job in your own home life, whatever it might be, it's easy to forget the underlying emotion and just the real profound emotion that is involved in all of this. So that is a big part of it. It's just kind of explaining that family perspective to the long-term caregivers and others who work in that environment, which again, I think is so important. But the other 2 services is that I'm continuing to speak publicly, which I've been doing for quite a few years, even starting back before my father passed and finished his Alzheimer's marathon. And then also working with families individually in what I'm calling a mentorship. So I'm mentoring individual families because I look back to when my journey started and I was absolutely overwhelmed at all of these huge, monumental, practical decisions you have to make while you are also still grieving what you are losing.
I would say so many emotions go with each different. I mean, there have been times where I've called you and you've listened to me cry on the phone because of, you're a mom. We've had so many titles. You and I have talked about this, so many different titles that we've carried. And I think as we see a rise in caregiving, because we see a rise in the baby boomer generation, I think we've got to think about these things, right? We see more and more people retiring, which means we have a generation, one of the largest generations, not the largest anymore. Apparently the millennials have preceded the baby boomers. I didn't know that until recently, but
that does sound familiar.
Don't blame me if I'm getting the statistic wrong. Sorry, people, but that's what I've heard. But the baby boomer generation is now retiring and they are growing older. And that means that we're going to have a very large generation of individuals who have to care for while who are also raising their own families, right? Where do you have, if you have like pieces of advice or, things that women in our same situation of having to caregive and raise families, what is some of that advice? I know what you've told me, but I'm curious to hear what you've said would give to the audience around, I don't like to use the word balance, but integrating those aspects or the intersectionality of caregiving as a mother and then caregiving as a daughter.
I think it goes back, honestly, to my mission statement of you are not alone. And very practically, I think what that means for you as a person is to look around you. Who is in your village? What are the resources that you have, even beyond those family and friends, church, whatever? What are the resources within your community? For example, Wisconsin, in every county, they have a dementia specialist, a dementia coordinator who can help facilitate all of these events and opportunities for people on this very journey. In Minnesota, the Alzheimer's Association, which is obviously a national organization that does incredible work. I mean, they have resources. So many goodbyes. I'm here for you. There's places and people that want to help you in this journey. And I really think that if you're a mom, if you're single, if you're a partner, whatever your title is outside of this journey, you still are not going to be able to do it alone. It's exhausting. It's hard. And you need that emotional support. And you just need practical support. You need financial advisors to give you the right advice so that you're prepared for what's to come. And you mentioned the number about the baby boomers. I mentioned that it'll be a 1.1 trillion by 2050. It also would be 12.7 million people. And again, that's people. We forget about that number. We only have 5.7 million people in Minnesota currently today. So we're more than twice our state population by then. And it's so dramatic when you think of the ripple effect. So yes, to the caregiver challenge, there is that gap right now. And what we need, that's only going to grow. We know that for a fact. The pandemic has exhausted that workforce. So, there's just a lot of need. And the fact of the matter is we have to be all in this all together. So if you find yourself, if you wake up and realize, I have an epiphany, I'm in this because my loved one is in this, just look around you and just see, I'm not alone. Where do I go? Because tapping into those support systems is key to sustaining yourself, because it's not a short journey. And that's the complete reality. That's the truth of it.
Yeah, it's a decade plus long journey sometimes. And we're on year 6 in our family, and dad is still healthy and at home. And his doctors have said, because he's physically healthy, this journey will be longer for our family. And that's the hard and fast truth sometimes, is this isn't a Band-Aid that gets ripped off. It's something that happens very slowly and can be a very hard emotional experience. And if you don't have the right community around you to support you, it can be very, very hard. And there are a lot of resources out there, especially for individuals who are still working. Don't forget Family Leave Act. right? If you've got to sign up for FMLA so that you can protect your job and still be able to be a caregiver, those options are available to you. I recently read a statistic about the sandwich generation, and 67% of the sandwich generation that are caregivers are still working. So
yep.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge to be able to balance all of the responsibilities. So not only are you still working full time, you're managing a household and you're managing parents. And I've had this conversation with my husband quite frequently, in both impassioned conversations. And
I love that. Impassioned. I know what that translates to.
Yeah, there may be a few 4-letter words that happen in his direction. Which if you are a partner of somebody who is battling this and you don't, sometimes have grace for those emotions that have to give out. And I'm grateful that Jim lets it roll off his back like a duck lets water roll off his back sometimes. But, that it's hard because it's hard to explain to somebody who's never been through it. And oftentimes I say to him, like, you don't have to say goodbye to your dad literally every single time you see him. And I don't mean see you later, because you don't know what you're going to get the next time you have him, or you don't know what's going to happen that day. Do I have to worry about, getting him to the bathroom in time? Do I have to worry about, if I take him out to eat, do you have to worry about somebody judging him because he doesn't know how to read the menu anymore? There's little things or him feeling silly because he can't read the menu anymore. Right. And there's so many feelings that go in and you're trying to read the whole room. And then also, I'm sure you went through this with your daughters too. Like my daughters are like, why can't Grandpa Mike do the same things that Grandpa Jim can do? And there's a comparison of trying to teach little people that it's just your grandfather is on a different journey. And so many different emotions that go with all of those things. If you could change the world that we live in from an Alzheimer's standpoint, obviously, both of us would request a cure, but how do we create this movement of inclusivity and understanding? We know that also, we haven't even talked about this part of it. Alzheimer's does affect non-white families exponentially larger than white families. How do we create this education and awareness of an inclusive community that's supporting all individuals who are being touched by this?
Well, and just to follow up on that, because I love numbers, because I think it really bases it in reality, and it just is a good reminder. But to that point, Black Americans are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's, and Hispanics are 1.5 times as likely to develop Alzheimer's as white Americans. So absolutely, this disease does discriminate. Women are 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients, if you will. It's not always a term that we use, patients, but of those who are living with Alzheimer's, 2/3 of them are women. So you get an idea that this is a really hard disease for populations that are already struggling with other gaps in our society. And so I think a really important part of dealing with this is the destigmatization, if you will, the destigmatization. There we go. That second time works.
Say it 10 times fast.
Yeah, I know. 10 times. Let's go. Really go. 1, 2, 3. But a really important part of it is just making sure that we all reassure each other and remind each other that you are not alone. You're not alone, Shannon. I'm not alone. Families who are discovering this today, tomorrow, and next month, they aren't alone either. And with that acceptance and information and knowledge sharing, we can perhaps inform others in our community too, who don't have it in their own home necessarily, but still need to be sensitive to that, so that when they do see someone struggling to read that menu in a restaurant, there isn't other assumptions being made, but that there may be a response of support, of understanding, of consideration and compassion. Compassion is paramount to dealing with this disease in a respectful way, and also in a efficient way, because if you don't have that kind of compassion, you're not going to be able to interact with the person who has the disease. And you're also not going to be able to invest wisely in how to address this disease, both in terms of caregiving and frankly, in terms of the research that we need to do as well. So I think a lot of it is about information. So when you say, you know, what do we do? What can we do? Yeah, short of us finding that silver bullet with a cure. And I trust that those researchers will continue. They'll persist because they have a lot of incentive to do that. We all have incentive to do that. But short of that, it's all about sharing our stories, helping others understand what this is like, helping others to better respond to what is, again, a community crisis. This is not limited to one group within our community. This is affecting all of us across the board.
Yeah, I mean, you said it correctly that I think that there are a lot of gaps that we don't see within this, and compassion leads to that era. I argue too that like education around like how do you pre-plan for these situations? How do you have some of these conversations? Because I think in some communities, financial conversations are a faux pas. We don't talk about them. We don't talk about how much money we make. We don't talk about how much money we have. We don't talk about what we need somebody to do when we're dying or when we're sick, right? These different things occur in different families, generations too. The greatest generation, when you think of that, that's the generation that also experienced some level of financial hardships, right? And so how do you get them into a status where they're willing to share, and opening those doors and having those conversations and understanding what resources are available? Because there are a lot, and it can be very overwhelming, not just from how to emotionally handle this, but how to like practically handle it. Like, where do you go for care? How do you get care? How much does care cost? When we talk about the financial aspects of things. And there have been a lot of people, unfortunately, in the industry I work in who have taken advantage of people and placed them in products that don't make sense to protect them against these types of life events. But that's where you have to like pull the onion back and start to really realize what's out there and what is most beneficial for individuals. And I think in some areas, we just have to build that education even more and open the door. And I think part of that is representation of individuals and creating those conversations in different communities so that we can do that in different ways.
Absolutely. And there is a lot of powerful outreach. Even I've made so many connections in this field, and we are blessed in our community here in Minnesota to have, you know, not only Mayo Clinic, but the University of Minnesota with their healthcare and aging departments, and phenomenal gerontologists and neurologists and experts in this field who are doing important work. And they are recognizing, and they're constantly reaching out to communities of Native Americans, communities of African Americans, communities of Hispanics, recognizing that we need to do more outreach, because this is, again, we're all in this together, and it's going to take all of us to educate, inform, and be there for each other.
Yeah. And if resources and education and conversations aren't happening in one community, it's our job to be able to partner, not go into that community and tell them what to do, but rather to come in and show and understand where the gaps are. How do we help? How do we bring our resources, and what makes the most amount of sense? This young woman that I was telling you about is an African-American woman. And she said, nobody ever told me about this. Just like, I didn't know anything about it. And, you know, then I've had these conversations with many individuals of my grandfather and grandmother don't want to tell me about their money, and I'm the one that has to take care of it. So how am I supposed to take care of them if I can't understand it? And so I'm going to do a whole episode just on having some of those financial conversations, because the caregiving part of it is very real. And then there comes the physical caregiving and then the financial caregiving. And it's almost a two-person job. And sometimes one person is handling it all. So
It's a lot. And that's when you look for your resources again around you. Yeah.
Yeah. So in kind of closing and putting a bow on this conversation, even though we could continue to talk all day long about this topic until we solve the problems, right?
Right.
That we want to. We won't stop having this conversation until we have a cure, and that cure is reaching the hands of everyone that needs it, right?
Yeah. I can't wait. I can't wait for that day. I can't wait for my company to no longer be relevant. I will be so grateful. I'll do a celebratory dance. But we have a few days until then, I think.
Yeah, we absolutely do. So if you're in this caregiving scenario, and maybe a woman like ourselves, who's a mom, who has many hats and many titles that she wears, besides knowing that she's not alone, are there any two or three practical things right now today that you encourage her to do?
Reach out to me or to the Alzheimer's Association, to a specific organization that deals with this. Put your name on an email, put your name on a mailing list, sign up for a support group, do something very concrete directly related to Alzheimer's outreach and education. Do that now, because it will pay back. It'll be a 2-minute task. It'll pay back dividends, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is to, throughout your journey, just try to recognize that you still need to preserve your own identity. This is going to be all consuming. It's going to be overwhelming. And carve out that time to just have moments to reflect on what you need professionally, personally, within your family, within your personal life, in terms of your friendships and your maybe most intimate relationships. I mean, just really be conscious and deliberate about acknowledging that, because if you aren't deliberate about that, it will quickly get swallowed up by what is overwhelming. And I think the third thing is just really, be present in the way that feels appropriate for your particular relationship. Are you really close to your loved one? Do you want to be hands-on? Develop a schedule that allows you to do that as much as possible. Or is your role maybe more hands-off, given what kind of dynamics you had with your loved one? In which case, can you outsource it? Look elsewhere for people who are qualified, capable, and respectful that can also assist in either a hands-on financial way or in that very practical caregiving role. So I think looking and being honest, I mean, each of those steps, you'll notice they're practical. There's practical advice included in each of them, but it's also really reflective. It's an emotional process. We need to, and that's the whole part of this process. That's the whole challenge, is that it's both emotionally and very practically exhausting. So you need to attend to and address both parts of what it's taking out of you. You need to approach both problems with that kind of a solution.
Oh, I could not agree with you more. Because as you and I have talked about, it's finding that identity afterwards. And if you don't let go of it through the process, the journey on the other side will be much easier. Thank you, Karla, for the work that you are doing. Where can individuals find out more about So Many Goodbyes? We'll tag everything in the show notes, but if you can share with us where people can find out more information, that would be wonderful.
Thank you so much. It's at SoManyGoodbyes.com. So Many Goodbyes on social media. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, the whole LinkedIn, whatever. You can also follow me at Karla Hult. And then also you can email me at Karla@SoManyGoodbyes.com.
Well, thank you, Karla. And like you said, we hope we get to a point where we don't have to have these conversations anymore, because we've got a cure.
Amen. And until then, everyone out there, you are not alone.
Yes. Thank you so much, my friend.